My sister faked a pregnancy to destroy my wedding, but I was secretly paying for her entire life. I always knew I was the responsible one. From the time I could tie my own shoes without being asked, that title seemed nailed to my back. I wasn't just the older sister. I was the stand-in adult whenever our parents were too tired, too distracted, or just too enamored with Haley to notice anything else. I got straight A's without anyone reminding me to study, folded the laundry without being asked, packed my own lunch, and sometimes hers too. Haley was the baby, the wild spirit, the one who danced barefoot on the patio and left cereal bowls on the floor for days. And still, somehow, she was the one who drew the spotlight like a magnet. No one ever said it out loud, but the air in our house said it for them. Haley was the favorite. She didn't need to be responsible. She didn't need to earn anything. She just had to exist, pouty and golden-haired and loud. And the world shifted to accommodate her. Our mom called her a handful with this affectionate smile, as if chaos were endearing. She'd throw tantrums in Target aisles and still come home to kisses and new toys. I'd spend hours carefully crafting a school project and get a nod. "A good job, honey," said over her shoulder while Haley was being told how naturally gifted she was for doodling flowers on the wall with permanent marker. It wasn't that I hated my sister. That would have been easier to understand. It was that I wanted to be seen too. Not praised for being easy or quiet or such a help. I wanted to be loved for just being me. But that space was already occupied, and I learned early on not to compete with someone who doesn't even realize she's winning. I stopped expecting applause. I learned to settle for approval. I became useful. If Haley was the storm, I was the foundation. And everyone in our house preferred storms. Storms are exciting. Foundations are invisible until they crack. I remember one time, I brought home a regional math trophy. My teacher had insisted I enter the contest. I didn't even want to, but I practiced for weeks and ended up beating kids 2 grades above me. I stood at the door with the medal in my hand, waiting for someone to say something that mattered. Haley had just dyed her hair with Kool-Aid in the upstairs bathroom and stained the tub bright pink. She came down dripping water and attention, and that was that. My medal stayed in a drawer. No one asked how the competition went. At some point, I stopped trying to bring things home to be proud of. The house wasn't built to celebrate me. If anything, I became a fixture, the reliable one who could be left to deal with everything else. When Haley locked herself out of the house, I'd walk home from school to let her in. When she missed the bus, I'd cover for her. When she cried because our mom said no, I'd be the one to sneak her extra dessert to shut her up. And somehow that became our rhythm. My competence made room for her chaos. My silence kept things stable. They called her charismatic. That's the word they always used, like it excused everything. My dad would chuckle and shake his head when she broke something or lied or failed to follow through. "That's just Haley," he'd say, as if that was explanation enough. "She's got that spark, doesn't she?" "Yeah, I guess." Meanwhile, I could feel myself disappearing. Sparkless, solid, steady, and ignored. The worst part? I internalized it. I became proud of being dependable because it was the only thing I had. I told myself I didn't want the kind of attention Haley got. Messy, unpredictable, undeserved. I told myself I didn't need praise. But I did. God, I did. And when I didn't get it, I stopped asking for it. I learned to do everything on my own and resent everyone for letting me. And then I turned that resentment into more hard work, more good grades, more perfectly folded laundry. And that tension, that deep, quiet unfairness, it planted itself between us like a wall made of glass. I could see her. She could see me. But we weren't on the same side. Not really. Not ever. By the time we were teenagers, I'd long stopped expecting her to understand. She didn't mean to take up all the air. She didn't realize the way our parents tilted the whole house in her direction. She thought I liked being the way I was, organized, quiet, calm. She thought it was a choice. Maybe I did too. But now, looking back, I know better. I wasn't born the responsible one. I became her because someone had to. After college, I didn't join a big-name firm or chase a polished career path like my peers. I joined a startup nobody had ever heard of, a bare-bones little data company operating out of a converted basement in San Mateo. No glass-walled offices, no catered lunches, no ergonomic chairs. Just 3 of us and a dream that most people would have laughed at if we'd ever said it out loud. I worked without weekends. Literally. There were entire months I didn't see daylight. I lived off bulk ramen, slept under my desk in a sleeping bag, showered at a gym 2 blocks away, and wore the same hoodie until it started to smell like old coffee and dry sweat. I poured myself into lines of code that ran so deep into the night, they became my lullaby. No praise. No good job. No one to care but me. And I liked it that way. No family expectations. No Haley-sized shadows hanging over me. No one asking if I was okay, with that tone that meant they didn't really think I was. Then it happened. I was 28 when the acquisition came through. One of the giants, you know the name, but I won't say it, bought us out. Overnight, our ridiculous little platform became the backbone of their real-time data pipeline. I was standing in the kitchen eating cold oatmeal when the co-founder called and said the paperwork was signed. After taxes, options, equity, and some brutal waiting periods, I walked away with just over $13 million in my name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at my spoon, dumped the oatmeal, took 2 days off work, and walked to the ocean alone for the first time in years. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Haley. Not even the friends I still had left from college. My family, the same people who spent my whole childhood looking past me to marvel at Haley's spark, didn't deserve to know. If they found out, it would only become another thing to weaponize. My mom would say I was lucky. My dad would ask what I was doing with it, like it was his money. Haley would start dropping hints about living her truth on a beach somewhere. I didn't need any of that. But I couldn't forget how tight things had always been. How my dad used to sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and a headache. How the heating would be turned off at night to save on bills. How mom would shop creatively to make groceries stretch. I remembered, and I wanted to help. Just not openly. Not in a way that let them think it came from me. So I built a trust, quietly, through a faceless firm in Delaware, with no name attached to mine. My parents started receiving monthly housing stipends as part of a fictitious generational study. It sounded official enough, something about long-term domestic economic resilience. I even hired someone to draft the cover letter. The money showed up, they asked no questions. They just sighed in relief and assumed it was one of those rare strokes of good fortune they'd never gotten before. Haley was trickier. She was in another one of her reinvention phases, something about getting back into visual art, even though last month she was a podcaster and the month before that she was in a Reiki training. I created a fake grant through a fake nonprofit. The West Grove Collective, totally made up, beautifully designed. She received an email announcing that she'd been selected for an emerging female artist stipend based on work she'd casually posted online. She called it a sign. I called it convenient. I funneled the money through a shell LLC, set up automatic payments, even rented out a small Brooklyn gallery to host her installation show. She posted selfies at the opening, called it the beginning of her real life, and cried in front of a sculpture made of torn denim and hot glue. I watched the video on mute. I did it all not because they deserved it, not because they ever saw me, but because I could, because I had spent a lifetime picking up after the emotional chaos of people who never thanked me, because I didn't want their lives to fall apart, not for their sake, but because I knew if they did, it would be me they'd call to fix it. $13 million. And not one of them knows. Sometimes I wonder what they'd say if they found out. But I already know the answer. They'd ruin it. Like they ruin everything. So I stayed quiet. And kept coding. Not for money. But because in those lines of logic, I was seen. Not compared. Not diminished. Not tolerated. Just seen. My parents never saw it coming. One day they were drowning. A business barely staying afloat. Bills stacked on the edge of collapse. Mortgage payments slipping behind. Medical insurance on hold. Collection calls creeping into their dinner hours. And then, out of nowhere, the tide turned. Some miracle. Some unexplained reprieve that no one could quite name, but everyone accepted. The bank renegotiated their mortgage terms. Suddenly, their monthly payments were slashed by more than half. Their insurance premiums were mysteriously paid in full for the next 2 years. Their outstanding credit card debt vanished under a label that read, external consolidation. They called it a grant. A blessing. My dad even said, over Sunday breakfast, that someone up there must still be watching out for us. I stirred my coffee and said nothing. It wasn't God. It was me. And it hadn't been a one-time thing. That was the part no one ever noticed. It started slow. I paid off a lingering dental bill under the name of a community wellness initiative. Then I created a shell company, masked as a family financial consultancy, to handle their restructuring and push through the mortgage modification they never would have gotten on their own. I even faked a financial hardship application on their behalf, complete with forged documentation and a non-existent caseworker whose email I managed personally. They got approval within 3 weeks. Then there was Haley, my sister, whose definition of responsibility was remembering to charge her phone before brunch, suddenly won a full-ride scholarship to a private liberal arts school she'd barely qualified for. A scholarship that didn't exist on any public record. One that came with a housing stipend, book allowance, and living expenses generous enough that she managed to land herself in a downtown apartment with stainless steel appliances, rooftop access, and a concierge who probably knew her oat milk latte order better than her GPA. She told everyone it was destiny, some kind of karmic reward for believing in herself. I let her believe it. I paid the school directly through a nonprofit front. I managed her rent through another LLC setup for supporting emerging female voices in the arts. I even covered her credit cards, discreetly, of course, under the guise of a young creator's subsidy. They all believed in miracles because it was easier than admitting they'd been bailed out by the person they forgot to see. I didn't do it for recognition. God knows I didn't need more hollow thank yous or forced family hugs that came with the bitter aftertaste of obligation. I did it because I couldn't watch them collapse. Not because they deserved saving, but because I had the power to keep the floor from falling out beneath them. And for better or worse, that responsibility still sat on my shoulders like it always had. I watched my mother open a new line of credit without blinking, convinced that the financial gods had finally smiled on her after years of struggle. I watched my father drive a newer car, one I quietly leased in the name of a business vendor account. I saw Haley post photos of herself with overpriced takeout, captioned with things like, "Hard work pays off," as if effort had anything to do with her life working out. They never knew that every thread holding them together ran through me. And I wasn't some saint. I kept receipts. Every transaction, every wire transfer, every lease, every policy, every bill I covered. Not because I planned to use it against them. I didn't need leverage, but because part of me still needed to see proof that I wasn't imagining it all. That I wasn't crazy for feeling this exhausted, this bitter, this invisible. They celebrated the sudden turn in their luck like it had come from nowhere. Said things like, "Maybe we finally turned the corner," or "Funny how life works out when you stop worrying." As if worry had ever fixed anything. As if someone else hadn't been up at 2 a.m. doing math on 3 monitors and funneling money through legal gray zones so they wouldn't lose the house. Sometimes I get messages from Haley. "OMG, this scholarship is a lifesaver. I can finally breathe," followed by heart emojis and photos of her new balcony furniture. I never replied. Let her believe she earned it. Let them all believe they'd weathered the storm and come out stronger. Meanwhile, I was the one pulling tarp over the holes in their roof while they danced inside, dry and clueless. That's what I was in this family. The quiet fixer. The invisible foundation. The rescuer they never saw. And that's how I kept it. Because the only thing worse than them never knowing what I did would have been watching them pretend they were grateful. I met Craig at an industry panel I almost didn't attend. I had been pulling 16-hour days on a back-end overhaul and barely had the energy to wash my hair, let alone network. But something in me, maybe the part still searching for a life outside of code and corporate silence, made me show up. He was on the panel, sitting near the end, dressed in a muted navy shirt and speaking with a calm that didn't try to sell itself. That's what struck me first. He didn't perform confidence. He just was. His voice had that steady cadence that made you want to lean in. He spoke about building spaces that made people feel like they belonged in their own lives. I found myself watching his hands while he talked, the way he folded them, how still they were. We didn't exchange numbers that night. He found me later, through a mutual connection on LinkedIn, of all places. No games, no chase. Just a short message. "I liked what you said about data being a language. Want to get coffee and keep the conversation going?" And that was it. Simple. Direct. Exactly what I hadn't known I needed. Craig owned his own firm. Nothing flashy, small, focused, precise. He designed libraries and clinics and the occasional private home, but his passion was public architecture. Spaces for people who didn't get to choose where they lived. I liked that about him. He cared about impact, not just beauty. He listened when I spoke. He asked real questions. He didn't interrupt. After so many years of being looked through or around, especially by the men I met in tech, it felt like exhaling for the first time. So, yes, I was nervous when I invited him to dinner. It wasn't formal, just a simple meal at my place. I had warned him my cooking wasn't glamorous, and he said he preferred honest food anyway. I was plating the roasted vegetables when Haley showed up unannounced, claiming she was just in the area and thought she'd say hi. She didn't even look at me when she walked in. Her eyes went straight to Craig. She tilted her head slightly, smiled in that breathy way she did when she wanted to be noticed, and introduced herself like the room had shifted gravitational pull around her. I should have known. At first, it was subtle. Too subtle for anyone but me to notice. She laughed too hard at his jokes, the ones that weren't even funny. She asked him if he worked out and touched his forearm while complimenting his watch. Said something about loving architecture and wishing someone could design her a life that didn't feel so empty. I was mid-sentence when she interrupted to ask if Craig believed in soulmates. She didn't even look at me when she said it. He smiled politely, kept the conversation moving, answered her questions like she was just being friendly. He didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to see it. I sat there watching my sister flirt with the first man in years who made me feel safe in my own skin, not out of interest, not because she liked him, but because I did. I'd seen versions of this before, Little jabs, moments when Haley's attention turned sharp around things that were mine. But this was different. This wasn't teasing. This wasn't accidental. This was strategy. She looked at him the same way she used to look at my birthday presents, calculating whether she could make them hers just by smiling the right way. Craig didn't notice. He was too busy trying to make everyone comfortable, too earnest to see the way she was circling me without moving her feet. But I saw it. Every glance, every lean in, every poor me anecdote about her exhausting dating life. I saw the way she turned the evening into a stage, like she'd walked in late, but still expected the spotlight to shift in her direction. And that was the moment it finally clicked for me. The jealousy I used to brush off as childish or unintentional wasn't either of those things. It wasn't random. It wasn't petty. It was deliberate, patterned, engineered to destabilize. She didn't just want attention. She wanted mine. She wanted what I built, what I nurtured, what I protected. Not to keep it, just to prove she could take it. And it wasn't even about Craig. It never had been. When Craig proposed, it felt like a pause in the noise, a clear, honest moment that stood still against everything that had ever been chaotic in my life. He didn't make a grand production. No photographers, no viral-worthy Neil. Just him, standing in our kitchen, holding out a simple ring with a slightly shaking hand and asking, "Can we build a life together?" And for the first time in a long time, I said yes without second-guessing myself. We agreed on a small wedding. Nothing over the top. Just people we cared about, a quiet space, and a day that felt like ours. I asked Haley to be my maid of honor because part of me still wanted that version of sisterhood I'd never really had. And maybe, in some diluted corner of my mind, I believed giving her a title meant she'd finally rise to the occasion. That maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. She had access to everything. The planning spreadsheets, the vendor contacts, the timeline. I gave it to her willingly. I wanted her to feel included, responsible, important. I was managing a full product launch at work, and she promised she'd help with the details, follow up with the florist, confirm the reservation on the venue, make sure the check for the string quartet got delivered on time. She made promises the way other people breathe, easily and without meaning. The first missed meeting didn't even surprise me. She said she had car trouble. Texted 5 hours later with a blurry photo of a flat tire and a sad face emoji. The florist had already left. I apologized. Rescheduled. I didn't mention the fact that she'd posted an Instagram story from a rooftop bar an hour after the supposed breakdown. I told myself she probably needed the escape. Then it started compounding. She forgot to drop off the deposit for the bakery. She misplaced the RSVP list. She called to say she'd accidentally booked the rehearsal dinner at the wrong place, a sushi lounge instead of the garden cafe I had written in bold on the master schedule. I had to scramble to fix it, to call vendors myself in between meetings, to pretend like I wasn't unraveling while my own sister left voicemail apologies in her baby voice tone, like it would smooth over everything with a laugh. Then came the check. It was a deposit for the venue. I had written it, sealed it, and handed it to her directly at brunch. She smiled, slid it into her purse, said, "I've got it, don't stress," and waved off my concerns. A week later, the venue called and said they hadn't received payment. I checked the bank statement. The check had cleared, but not to the venue. It took me 3 hours, a call to the bank, and a PDF from their records to see the name the check was endorsed to. Haley. It went into her personal account. $22,000. Gone. I called her, and she picked up on the second ring like she knew I would. Her voice was full of manufactured shock, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. Said it must have been a mix-up. Said maybe she grabbed the wrong envelope. Said she'd fix it right away. I asked her where the money went. Silence. Then she sighed, this long, exhausted breath like I was the one being dramatic, and said she needed a down payment. Said she'd been without a car for months. Said she saw an opportunity and took it. "I was going to pay you back," she said, like that made it better. Like stealing was just borrowing with poor timing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there holding my phone to my ear and feeling something inside me go still. Like a part of me that had always been waiting for recognition, for love, for basic decency, finally stopped hoping. I told her I forgave her. And I meant it, in the technical sense. I didn't report her. I didn't tell our parents. I didn't cancel the wedding. I covered the cost out of pocket and reissued the check to the venue myself. I kept the peace like I always did. But something changed. A signal lit up inside me that I couldn't ignore. Not anger. Not vengeance. Just truth. Cold, clean, undeniable. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was sabotage. Calculated. Subtle. Quiet enough to look like clumsiness unless you knew the pattern. And I did. She didn't want to help. She wanted it to fall apart. There's a certain kind of silence that comes after betrayal. Not the loud, explosive kind where everything shatters at once, but the slow, surgical kind. The kind that comes with clicking through folders you created yourself and realizing what's inside them is being used against you. After the stolen venue check incident, I stopped making excuses for Haley. I didn't confront her about every little thing anymore. I just started watching. Quietly. Carefully. And when the rumors started circulating, vague, strategically dropped comments from Haley about how hard it is to be expecting during wedding planning, and how she might have to slow down soon, I didn't ask. I listened. Then she slipped. She told Craig's cousin during brunch that she wasn't sure yet, but probably around 10 weeks. I did the math. 10 weeks ago, she was posting vacation selfies from Palm Springs, wine in hand, leg up on a cabana lounge. She was never subtle, just always confident no one was paying attention. Except I was. She didn't know I still had full admin access to the back end of the trust I'd created in her name. The same one funding her education, her housing, and most recently, her growing list of medical expenses. I hadn't touched it in months, not since automating the payments and setting up dummy invoicing structures. But that week, I logged in. And what I saw wasn't just suspicious, it was absurd. Her prenatal appointments were billed under a wellness clinic that specialized in cosmetic for drips and hormone balancing. The pharmacy purchases were from a beauty and wellness chain that didn't even carry prescription prenatal vitamins. One invoice, labeled ultrasound imaging, was for a thermal massage service. And yet, she kept submitting them, one after another, marked urgent. I kept going, dug deeper, found that she'd used the stipend account to order a small silicone belly pad from a medical supply site that catered to costume departments and film studios. She'd tagged it as support garment. At first, I didn't believe what I was seeing. I thought, maybe, just maybe, she was lying to someone else. Not to me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about manipulation. It was strategy. And once I opened that door, I couldn't stop walking through. So I pulled the metadata off a shared iCloud account she hadn't logged out of when she borrowed my iPad months ago. Photos synced automatically. Buried in her camera roll was a series of mirror selfies. One with the pad strapped under her hoodie, another where she tried different lighting to make her face look pale. A third of a fake OB/GYN form she'd mocked up on Canva, then screenshotted like it was proof of something real. The worst part wasn't even the photos. It was the texts. She'd been messaging one of her friends, a girl named Brooke I barely remembered from college, with a full play-by-play plan. Going to announce it at the rehearsal dinner, one message read, "Want max impact? Watch Julia's face." Another said, "Thinking about faking a miscarriage during the ceremony. Like fainting or something. Then I'll be too fragile for any drama." Followed by a crying laughing emoji. I sat there, staring at the screen, heart pounding, scrolling back and rereading the words until they blurred. This wasn't about attention. It was about control. About making everything, even my wedding, orbit her gravity. About twisting empathy into currency. She was planning to weaponize a lie, to hijack the most vulnerable kind of sympathy and detonate it in the middle of a day that wasn't supposed to be hers. There was no ambiguity. No, maybe she's just spiraling, or maybe it's a cry for help. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was building a scene, setting the stage, crafting the disaster ahead of time like it was performance art. And the scariest part? She was enjoying it. The rehearsal dinner was held at a quiet little vineyard on the edge of the hills, the kind of place where everything smells like rosemary and old stone and money spent wisely. The light was soft, golden, almost dishonest in how gentle it made the world feel. Craig stood beside me, joking with the caterer. My mother was finally smiling in a way that wasn't calculated. My father, glass in hand, tapped his fork against it with that particular kind of pride he reserved for other people's accomplishments. Everyone settled. Everyone looked at him. He raised the glass and started the toast. Something about love, about family, about growing up. The words washed over the room like a warm wave, the kind that pulls sand from beneath your feet just slightly. I let myself breathe for one brief second. Then she did it. Haley, seated 2 places down, pressed her hand to her stomach with a quiet gasp, too loud to be accidental, too theatrical to be real, and said, I think I'm having complications." Every chair turned. The room froze in that awful half moment between panic and disbelief. Someone dropped a fork. My mother stood. Craig moved instinctively toward her. And I didn't move at all, because I knew what this was. I had seen it already, not in real life, but in the planning messages she'd sent, in the screenshot she'd saved labeled timing options, in the photo she'd taken of herself practicing how to fall. I stood slowly, picked up my phone from the table. No one noticed at first. They were still focused on Haley, on her pale face, on the way she clutched the edge of the table like she was going to faint. But then I spoke. "She's not pregnant." The room snapped toward me like a rubber band. She never was. Haley's eyes shot to mine, panic flickering across her face in an instant. She opened her mouth, probably to cry or lie or scream, but I was already tapping the screen of my phone. I mirrored the display onto the TV at the front of the room, the one we were supposed to use tomorrow for a slideshow of childhood photos. Instead, it lit up with a folder labeled Proof. The first image was a screenshot of a Canva-generated doctor's note. Her name misspelled, the clinic's logo crooked, no phone number. The second, a string of messages between her and Brooke. Announce at rehearsal, dramatic, but not too much. Think I'll fake miscarriage day of. Sympathy card equals played. The third was a selfie. Haley in the mirror with the fake pregnancy pad, trying on angles, testing which side looked more believable. Gasps. Audible gasps. Craig looked stunned. My father sat back in his chair like he'd been struck. And I wasn't done. I walked to the center of the room, reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, thick, tabbed, color-coded. Bank statements, wire transfers, trust documents, lease agreements, payment authorizations. I started laying them down on the table, one by one, like playing cards at a table no one realized was a game. This is the mortgage adjustment you all celebrated 2 years ago. It came from a trust one created. This is the lease on Haley's apartment, paid in full through an LLC I manage. This is the grant for Dad's insurance. This is the so-called scholarship Haley bragged about. It's not real. I wrote the application. I sent the money. I even wrote the rejection letters from the schools she never applied to. I kept going. No one interrupted. This is the account she used to buy a car, with a check I gave her for my wedding venue. Silence now. Real silence. The kind that doesn't have room for denial. My mother sat down without realizing she'd stood. Craig reached for my hand. I didn't take it yet. I needed to finish. I paid for everything. For years. Quietly. And all of you took it without asking why, without looking up, without once wondering if maybe, just maybe, someone was holding all of this together behind the curtain. Haley finally stood. Her face was red, but not from shame, from rage. That same look she gave me when she couldn't control the room. But this time, the room wasn't hers anymore. No one said a word. Not my father. Not my mother. Not Haley. Just a long, devastating quiet. The kind you only hear after something breaks in a way it won't recover from. And I stood in the center of it, no longer invisible. No longer convenient. No longer silent. We postponed the wedding the next morning. It wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches or broken flower vases. Just a quiet conversation over coffee, both of us still in the clothes we'd worn the night before. Craig looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, "Do you want to do this right now?" And I didn't lie. I told him I didn't know how to stand in front of people and promise a forever when I hadn't even been allowed to have a present. I told him I needed time. He nodded. No guilt. No pressure. Just that steady, honest presence that made me say yes in the first place. We didn't cancel the wedding. We just gave it back to ourselves. 3 days later, I called a family meeting. No surprises. No secrets. I wanted everything said out loud and in daylight. They came reluctantly. My father, arms crossed. My mother, already near tears. Haley, sunglasses on indoors, because of course she made herself the wounded one. I waited for them to sit. I had nothing written down. I didn't need to. I started with the truth. The funding ends in 60 days. Silence. I've covered everything from rent to tuition to healthcare to groceries for over 5 years. I did it quietly because I thought it would protect you. But now I understand that all it did was protect a system where no one had to look at me unless they needed something. My father tried to interrupt. I held up a hand and kept going. You have 60 days to transition. I've spoken to my financial advisor, and everything will be wound down by then. The trusts, the payments, the corporate shells. There won't be another dollar. Not for the mortgage. Not for Haley's apartment. Not for last-minute bailouts. Haley laughed. Loud. Sharp. So now you're punishing us? For not bowing down fast enough. I looked her dead in the eye. No. I'm just done playing a role in a story that was never mine. My mother asked how I could do this to the family. She didn't ask how I had done all this for the family. My father said I should have come to him sooner. I reminded him I had, that I'd dropped hints for years, that I'd asked for help and was ignored, that every time I tried to speak up, I was made to feel like I was ruining the peace. They didn't yell. They didn't apologize. They just sat in a kind of stunned disbelief, as if the ground beneath them had shifted and they didn't know what part of me to blame. But something cracked open that day. Not in them. In me. Because I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't feel guilty. I just said what needed to be said, and then I left. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't carry them on my shoulders as I walked away. It didn't happen all at once. No one had a sudden awakening. No perfect apology sealed with a group hug. The change came slowly, in inches, in things unsaid and things finally said, and not always kindly. It started with consequences. Real ones. My parents sold the house. They didn't tell me at first. I found out when a forwarding notice came through my inbox, an automated alert from a utilities account I had once set up in their name. The house was gone, the one they had held on to far longer than they could afford. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, near a bus line and a strip mall, and for the first time in years, they built a budget that wasn't dependent on magic or my silence. It was humbling to watch, and strangely humanizing. My mother started clipping coupons. My father picked up part-time consulting work. They argued more, but also sat at the kitchen table together in the evenings, notebooks open, highlighters in hand. There was something raw in it, something ordinary and honest that had been missing for decades. They were figuring it out. Late, but still. Haley lost the car. I didn't rejoice. I didn't gloat. I watched her post a tearful video on social media about downsizing her lifestyle, and then I watched her delete it the next day. She moved out of the luxury apartment she never paid for and into a 1-bedroom unit above a laundromat, the kind with cracked tile and no elevator. She didn't text me for help. Instead, she got a job. A real one. Entry-level admin assistant at a nonprofit she used to make fun of. She hated it, complained about the hours, the micromanagement, the smell of other people's lunches in the shared break room. But she showed up, and she stayed. I checked the company directory once. Her name was there, small and unremarkable, just another employee like everyone else. That alone felt like a revolution. She also enrolled in night classes at a community college. Graphic design. Nothing grand, but real. Structured. Earned. Then came therapy. My idea. Their resistance. My condition. It took 3 months of canceled sessions and passive-aggressive emails to get all 5 of us, my parents, Haley, me, and, at first reluctantly, Craig, into the same room with a licensed professional. A woman named Sylvia. She was quiet, didn't flinch easily, and didn't let any of us hide behind polished stories. The sessions were brutal. We talked about money, but not just the dollars. About power. About visibility. About what it meant to be the good child and what it cost. About how my father's silence mirrored his own father. How my mother's favoritism wasn't conscious but deeply ingrained. We traced behaviors like bloodlines, unspoken expectations, generational roles handed down like heirlooms no one wanted. Haley cried. A lot. Sometimes sincerely. Sometimes because she got caught in a lie she hadn't prepared to defend. She admitted things I never thought I'd hear. About jealousy. About growing up afraid of being irrelevant. About how easy it was to play the victim because it got her love when effort never did. My mother sat with her hands folded and said less than the rest of us. But she listened. Really listened. Once, near the end of a session, she looked at me and said, "I thought being proud of you meant leaving you alone. I didn't know that made you feel invisible." And she meant it. We kept going. Week after week. Old wounds. New understandings. I stopped waiting for someone to rewrite the past. I let it stay broken, but in the light this time. And slowly, without announcements or declarations, we all started stepping out of the roles we'd been locked into for so long. The martyr. The favorite. The provider. The bystander. The fixer. We laid them down, one by one. Not all the way. Not forever. But enough. Enough to make space for something closer to truth. 6 months later, we got married. No vineyards. No chandeliers. No choreographed toasts. Just a strip of coastline an hour from the city. The kind of place where the sand stays cool even in the sun and the wind doesn't ask permission. We invited 20 people. Chairs were mismatched. The ceremony started late because the sound system wouldn't work and no one cared. Craig wore a white shirt, open at the collar. I went barefoot. For the first time, the day felt like mine. Haley came. Not as maid of honor. Not in a custom gown. Just as a guest. She wore a dress she hadn't posted about beforehand. No dramatic entrance. No statement jewelry. She hugged me gently at the start of the evening and didn't try to make it a scene. But it was her toast I remember most. She asked if she could speak. For a moment, I hesitated, instinct still bracing for sabotage. But I nodded. She stood with a glass of cheap Prosecco, looked straight at me, and said, "I spent most of my life thinking you were the problem. You made me feel like I had to fight for space. I didn't see that you were the one making room for everyone else." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. "I'm sorry for what I took. For what I twisted. You weren't a rival. You were the standard. And now, you're the example." She sat down. No applause. Just stillness. And I believed her. My parents didn't ask for anything that day. No guilt-laced advice. No speeches about legacy or sacrifice. They gave us a check for $200 and a note that said, asterisk, "We're proud of you. And we're okay now." Asterisk, it was the most honest thing they'd given me in years. There were no roles left to perform. I wasn't the silent provider. The backup plan. The cautionary tale. I was just someone in a white linen dress, saying yes to a man who loved me with his eyes open. I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to carry anyone. I didn't need to explain myself. I was allowed to just be. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. So now I want to ask, have you ever had to burn down a version of yourself just to see who'd still be standing in the smoke? Have you ever carried a family so far that they forgot you had legs of your own? Because I wonder, what version of yourself did you have to stop being just to finally breathe?